Over the 70-year history of Formula One, they've raced on a lot of circuits. 71 tracks to be in fact. Or technically now it's 72 since Mugello's had the race, and next week when Portimao has theirs, it's going to be 73. Okay, the point is that they've raced on a lot of tracks over the years, and some of them were different than others. For example, you have Monza with its long straights and tight chicanes, Silverstone with its sweeping would make the tires go burr every once in a while, and you have Monaco with its tight barriers that Verstappen was crashing into. And then you have some weirder circuits from F1's past. You have the Little circuit in Austria, which is built in an old airfield next to the modern-day Red Bull Ring, which literally just looks like an old man's cane. And then you have the old Hockenheim Ring. Even though it's famous, it still looks like somebody stuck the wet piece of clay out. But I want weirder, okay? So I decided to go back and look up Wikipedia, the 5 weirdest tracks from F1's past, and, well, one from the present. So, I know nobody wanted this, but whatever, go ahead. Number 5. The Baku City Circuit. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't this on the calendar nowadays? How's this weird? Okay, well, shut up, I'll tell you. Number 1, look at this. I'm not joking, this is an actual quarter on the circuit. If you're not an F1 fan, you're not really used to this. This is turn 8 on this track. This track is only 7.6 feet. This is only 7.6 meters wide, 24 feet wide, and compared to a F1 car, that won't work, as a lot of drivers have exhibited over the years. You also have the comically large front straightaway, which is technically longer than the back straight of the Nürburgring, but I guess the kinks don't count, and I know Verstappen and Ricciardo are their breaking points now, so at least that's good. Number 4. The Pescara Circuit in Italy, used in the 1950s. And yes, you are not going insane. That literally does say 15.894 miles. This is a nearly 16-mile street circuit in the street of Italy, and it was completely insane, unsurprisingly. Weirdly enough, the track wasn't even supposed to hold an F1 race, but in 1957, the Belgian Grand Prix and Spa, the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort were cancelled, so F1 kind of needed another race. So they looked around Europe, saw Pescara, and dug its grave up because they needed another race to get it to a full championship number of 7 races. The race was not great. In fact, it was so bad that Enzo Ferrari didn't even want to enter his cars in, which is pretty impressive if you know who Enzo Ferrari is. This is the guy who thought his drivers were expendable. And unsurprisingly, this is canned after year 1958. Number 3. The Nürburgring Nordschleife. Ah, yes, you knew this one was going to be on here. You ever see pictures of F1 cars over the air in 1960? Yeah, that was mostly on the Nürburgring. This track is still famous to this day. Obviously, it hasn't hosted an F1 race in quite a long time, but it still is famous thanks to a slew of GTs and the Nürburgring 24 hours. But mostly it was canned in F1 because it was ridiculous, considering it was about 12 miles long and had barely any runoff. But whatever. So here's a POV, and it's probably the most famous track not to host an F1 race other than Circuit de Stars for Le Mans and maybe Daytona or Indianapolis. I don't know. So here's a POV. You're driving a car in the 1960s in the Nürburgring, everything's going well, and you're going through some of the corners. The car feels light, so you overcorrect. You slide off the track and into the wall, flipping the car over. What do you do now? Well, there's a couple of things you could do once you start careening out of control. You could either A, roll into a tree, or multiple trees in that matter, and, break your bones and die. Or you could fall down an embankment, rolling down while the car splits apart your now helpless sack of flesh known as formerly as a body. And you have to do both of these things while engulfed in flames. Yeah. Sorry, this was the 1960s, by the way. After Niki Lauda's fiery smash in 1976, the track was canned and is now replaced by the Nürburgring GP circuit, which is way safer and hosted its first F1 race in 7 years, which Lewis Hamilton won, surprisingly, after had an engine failure. Number 2, the Caesars Palace Grand Prix circuit. Yeah, this is not a fantastic track. As a matter of fact, the circuit was built in a parking lot. There's no pun on that, it was just built in a parking lot. There's literally no joke. It was built into the parking lot. Now, I know a lot of people think that, Paul Ricard is a parking lot. This was a parking lot. It was a parking lot for the casino of the Caesars Palace Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. At the time, it was just a parking lot. Now there are buildings on top of it. Now, this track was not great. In fact, it's probably one of the worst, if not the worst, to ever host an F1 race. But the main thing everyone disliked about it is that, well, number 1, it didn't go that well for the drivers, and they didn't like it, which I'll get into in a second. But the second thing was that it was plopped right at the end of the season for some reason. 1981 and 1982's championship finale, which were won by Nelson Piquet and Keke Rosser, respectively, happened on this circuit. It would make more sense if it was in the middle of the season, but no, they had to put it right at the end of the season, of the 16th and 17th half of the season, respectively. There also was the mention I mentioned earlier, in which drivers didn't like it that much because they were turning left a lot. As you can see, turns 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 1, and 2 were all left-handers, and drivers weren't used to it. After 1983, the track was handed over to Champ Car, where it raced for another 2 seasons before being canned entirely, and the former reigns of that track is now the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas. Woo-wee. And before we get to number 1, we're going to do some honorable mentions, because I didn't want to feature them all in the video. You have the Bahrain oval, in quotes, that is going to be hosted this year's Sakir Grand Prix. Yeah, it's pretty weird. You have the Ain Diab circuit in Morocco, which looks like a pancake that got flipped too early. It hosted one race, was pretty bad. No one really liked it. Got canned after a year. The only Moroccan Grand Prix ever, and the only Formula race in Morocco until the Marrakesh EP for Formula E happened in 2015. You have the Brooklyn circuit in Britain, which is the first permanent circuit ever in the world, and it had some monster banking on it. But it technically isn't a Formula One race because F1 didn't become a thing until 1950, and this track was bombed to the ground by the Nazis in 1939. So obviously, it didn't host an F1 race technically. You have Monza, the old Monza, with its big banking. This is probably number 6. I didn't want to put it on here because I didn't want to feature just old tracks, so I decided to put Baku in here for some spice. And the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which it doesn't really count, I mean, like the oval, because at the FIA kind of sanctioned the 100 in the 1950s. It was weird because it was a part of the calendar, but like nobody ran it except for Alberto Ascari and Giuseppe Farina a couple of years driving for Ferrari. But it doesn't really count, and that's kind of why Bill Vukovic had like a 100% F1 win record, just because that was the only races they entered. So, you know. And now, number 1, Avis. Oh, wait, I think I have my papers messed up here for a second. Avis. Nope, there's no joke to this. This is actually a circuit. And if you're wondering, this circuit goes about the side of an Autobahn. Yeah, once again, no punchline. It just goes about the side of an Autobahn. This is how it would be. So let me give you an example of how weird the circuit was. Let's say that for some reason the Boston Grand Prix still happened, RIP. But instead of hosting at this street circuit, it was on either side of the Mass Pike in Boston, with massive Daytona banking on one end and a hairpin on the other. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the banking. This is a file photo. Once again, no punchline. This is just completely ridiculous. Somebody clearly did a dot on here. Wait, hold up. Oh, wait, someone did on here. Fantastic. In 1959, in an F2 race preceding the Formula 1 German Grand Prix, Jean Barre, driving for Porsche, slid up the banking in the massive banked corner, slid over the wall, and fell out of the car while hitting a flagpole. He was killed instantly. Because, you know, there was no freaking wall on this side of the circuit. Look at this man. He's just sitting on there knowing that if he falls, it's just, you know, death. And more death over the side. To show more context for how big the banking is, this is it compared to Daytona, Danforth's final corner, and Indianapolis. It was nearly 45 degrees, it's just kind of incredible. In fact, they were actually going to build 2 of these. One of them was on the other side of the track, where the previously mentioned hairpin was. You can actually still see the remains of it in Google Maps. They were intending to build it in the 1930s, but then that whole World War II thing happened, so they kind of couldn't. Yeah. After in the 1990s, when the shortened circuit hosted a few DTM races, it was canned entirely. The old Turn 1 was instead demolished with the bricks and was now a Shanghai Turn 1 clone sort of thing. In fact, the race itself was probably the weirdest and worst in F1 history, because the race was split up into 2 heats of 30 laps. What? Well, I might I might go around to making this race an actual video in about 5 months, so have fun with that. Bye.